It began with an envelope that refused to be opened. In the cold, administrative silence of the Metropolitan Police Archives, one item from the Wyndham case remained sealed, a silent testament to a story everyone believed was over. A cream-colored envelope addressed to a ghost, Emily H. It had been found among the possessions of Annie Fraser upon her death in Holloway Prison in 1910, and there it sat, for decades, a locked door at the end of a dark corridor. The dust of years settled upon it, a soft gray shroud over a secret that refused to die. The official case was closed. Captain Wyndham's body had been pulled from the Thames, a supposed suicide, his pockets containing nothing but a waterlogged photograph of the woman he may have framed. Annie Fraser had died in her cell, a convicted accomplice, her name synonymous with treachery. Clara Wyndham and Eliza Harrow were mere footnotes in old newspapers, tragic figures in a faded melodrama. But this envelope, this was the loose thread. And if you pull a single thread with enough determination, the entire tapestry of the past can begin to unravel. Before we open it, before we follow this final, cold trail, I want you to consider this. We've seen the players, the captain, the wife, the maid. We think we know their roles. The arrogant officer, the fragile lady, the cunning servant. But what if we've been watching the wrong story entirely? What if the true villain and the true victim were someone else completely? What if every assumption we've made is merely a layer of misdirection, carefully laid down over the years like silt over a buried truth? Drop a single word in the comments below. Who you believe was ultimately responsible for the tragedy in that house on Belgrave Square? Was it the captain, Annie, or someone we haven't yet seen clearly? Keep that thought in mind as we open the envelope and step back into the shadows of 1905. The governor of Holloway Prison, a man not known for sentimentality, had ordered the envelope sealed shut. It was evidence, he declared to his subordinates, in a case now closed and best forgotten. But the truth was likely simpler and darker. He was afraid of what it might contain, afraid of the whispers it might unleash from the grave, whispers that could unsettle the comfortable narrative of justice served. So, it was filed away in a vault of forgotten things, remembered only by the most diligent clerks and the walls themselves, which have long, unforgiving memories. It wasn't until 1923, during a routine audit, that a junior archivist named Arthur Pimm, a man with a mind for patterns and a heart unsettled by loose ends, found the envelope. He was a small man in a small job, but he possessed a formidable curiosity. He noted its provenance, the Wyndham case. He knew the sensational stories, the headlines that had screamed of the poisonous parlourmaid. And with the careful, gloved hands of a historian, he did what no one had dared to do for 13 years. Under the weak, yellow light of a basement bulb, he broke the brittle wax seal. Inside was not a letter, not a confession, not a plea for forgiveness. It was a key, a small, tarnished silver key of the type used for a jewelry box or a private diary, in a single, folded square of paper, so crisp it seemed to crackle with withheld time. On it, in Annie Fraser's neat, schooled hand, was an address, 17 Cursitor Street, Clerkenwell. As for E. Harrow, Eliza Harrow, the missing governess, the blackmailer, the mother, the name was a spark on tinder, igniting a trail that had long grown cold. The investigation, long dormant, was now alive again in the heart of this one quiet man. Arthur Pimm, acting on his own initiative, a citizen detective stepping into the footprints of ghosts, went to Cursitor Street. The London fog, that great obscurer of truths, clung to the cobblestones that day. Number 17 was not a home. It was, and had been for 50 years, the premises of Eliza Harrow and Company, apothecaries. The shop was still there, though under new management, the gilt lettering on the window now flaked and faded. The current owner, an elderly man who had purchased the business from the estate, remembered the stories, the whispers of scandal that had clung to the previous proprietor. He was a man who appreciated history, and he led Pimm to a back room, a place that smelled of dried herbs and old wood, to a small cast-iron wall-mounted safe that had come with the building. Its contents were unknown, its combination lost to time. The key from Annie's envelope slid into the lock. It fit perfectly. The mechanism turned with a heavy, satisfying clunk that echoed in the silent room. The inside of the safe was a time capsule of a hidden life, a life lived in the shadows of a more public tragedy. It contained 3 things, each more damning than the last. First, a stack of letters tied with a faded ribbon, the paper fragile as a moth's wing, covered in a flowing, feminine script. Second, a studio photograph of a young, dark-haired girl of about 10, her expression solemn, her eyes holding a world of sadness that no child should ever know. On the back, written in the same hand as the locket inscription, "My Emily, aged 9. And third, a leather-bound ledger, its pages filled not with formulas for tonics and tinctures, but with a story. Eliza Harrow's story, a mother's testament. And this is where the narrative we thought we knew disintegrates. The foundation of the official case crumbled to dust in Arthur Pimm's hands. The letters were from Clara, not the frail, dying Clara of 1905, but a young, vibrant Clara Harrow, writing to her mother, Eliza, from the heat and dust of India. She wrote of her new life as the wife of the dashing Captain Edward Wyndham, of the regimental balls, the stifling social codes, the glamour that thinly veiled a deep-seated boredom. And then, the letters changed. The script grew more frantic, the tone darkened, bleeding through the ink. She wrote of a man whose charm curdled into control, whose smiles had a volcanic and unpredictable temper. She wrote of her profound isolation, a bird in a gilded cage, thousands of miles from home. And then, she wrote a child, a daughter, born not in a regimental hospital, but in a secluded hill station, away from prying eyes and judgmental whispers. The father was not Captain Wyndham. He was a kind, junior officer, a man Wyndham saw as a personal and professional rival, who had been killed in a skirmish on the northwest frontier just weeks before the birth. The child's name, chosen in a moment of both hope and despair, was Emily. Captain Wyndham, humiliated and enraged, forced Clara to give the baby away. He found a family. He told her a good, respectable British family stationed in Bombay. It was a lie, a cruel and calculated fiction. Eliza Harrow's ledger contained the grim truth, painstakingly pieced together over years of investigation and paid informants. Wyndham had paid a corrupt colonial official to have the infant placed in a Catholic orphanage for Anglo-Indian children, a place from which few ever emerged, a dumping ground for the empire's inconvenient children. When Clara discovered the deception, a part of her soul simply shattered. This was the nervous exhaustion that followed her back to London like a phantom. This was the source of the depths of the heart mentioned in her hidden letter. Her grief was not metaphorical. It was a physical, agonizing presence, a constant, screaming emptiness. She was a mother who had been forced to abandon her child to a fate worse than death. Eliza Harrow, upon learning the truth from her broken daughter, did what any mother would. She declared war. She confronted Wyndham in his own home. This was the blackmail he had hissed about in the study. She wasn't demanding money for herself. She was demanding the resources, the funds, to find her granddaughter, to buy the information, to travel, to bring Emily home. Every pound she wrung from him was a step closer to the child. Wyndham paid, but only enough to keep her quiet while he plotted a more permanent solution. The tension in the house on Belgrave Square wasn't just about a secret. It was a cold war, a silent, brutal battle fought across a parlor floor. And where was Annie Fraser in all of this? She was not a pawn. She was a volunteer, a conscious, willing agent. The ledger revealed one more staggering fact. Annie Fraser was not from the East End. She was from Glasgow, true, but she had not worked for a clergyman. That reference was a forgery, paid for by Eliza. She had, in fact, been a ward maid at the Glasgow Royal Infirmary. And before that, she had been a junior assistant to a prominent chemist. She knew her way around a laboratory. She understood weights, measures, and chemical reactions. She knew what certain compounds, derived from common sources like laurel water or peach pits, could do in specific doses. She hadn't come to the Wyndham house by chance. Eliza Harrow, in her desperate quest for justice, had sought out a young, intelligent, and sympathetic woman who could be placed inside the household. A spy, a sleeper agent. Her mission was not to kill Clara, but to protect her, to watch Wyndham, to gather evidence of his cruelty and his crime against the child, to be a friend and ally to Clara in that prison of a house. But something went terribly, catastrophically wrong. The inquest, the trial, they had all asked the wrong question. They asked, who poisoned Clara Wyndham? The real question, the one that haunted the edges of the evidence, was who was the poison for? Let's re-examine that first death in the house. The little spaniel, Poppy. The dog's bowl was stained with Clara's tea. The assumption, the natural conclusion, was that the dog had drunk the poison intended for its mistress. But what if it was the other way around? What if the mistress's tea had been the target all along, and the dog was a convenient, accidental victim? A test run for a much larger crime. And the poison itself, the cyanide compounds found in the cup. It's a fast-acting, brutal poison. It causes a violent, unmistakable death. If Annie, with her specific knowledge, had wanted to kill Clara quietly, to mimic her declining health, she would have chosen something slower, more subtle, something that accumulated in the system. Something like the arsenic-based tonics already present in the house. Cyanide was a statement. It was a weapon of panic, of instant removal. It was the weapon of an amateur or of someone who needed a problem to disappear immediately. The evidence in the safe and the chilling timeline it laid bare points to a horrifying conclusion. Captain Wyndham discovered Annie's true allegiance. He realized his wife and his mother-in-law had turned his own household against him. The blackmail would never end. His reputation, his officer's honor, his very freedom were at stake. He was being cornered, so he decided to end it with the cold efficiency he had learned on the battlefield. He would remove his wife, the source of the problem, and in doing so, he would frame the agent his enemies had sent into his home. It was a brutal, elegant solution. He would be the grieving, wronged widower, and the treacherous maid would hang for it. He began to administer the cyanide himself, in the very medicines Annie was trusted to give. He was poisoning his wife, using the bottle in the maid's hand as his delivery mechanism, making her an unwitting accomplice to her own mission's catastrophic failure. Annie, realizing what was happening, was trapped in a nightmare of her own making. If she accused the captain, it was her word against his. She was a servant, an imposter with forged papers. She would be dismissed instantly or arrested. If she changed the medicine or refused to give it, he would know she was on to him, and her life would be forfeit. She was forced to stand by, her knowledge a terrible burden, and watch as the woman she was sent to protect was systematically, deliberately murdered before her eyes. Her whispered testimony at the trial, "I only ever wanted to help her, to ease her suffering," takes on a new, horrific meaning. She wasn't talking about giving her medicine. She was talking about her powerlessness, her devastating failure to stop the poison. She was watching Clara suffer, and she could do nothing. This reframes everything. Annie's faint in the courtroom wasn't from the weight of guilt, but from the sheer, unbearable pressure of this secret knowledge. The captain's final, enigmatic note, "Tell Annie she did beautifully," was not praise for a job well done. It was a final, sadistic taunt. He was telling her, from beyond the grave, that he had known all along, that he had used her presence to perfect his crime, that he had won their secret war. But the story doesn't end with Clara's death and Annie's imprisonment. The ledger, in Eliza Harrow's determined hand, holds the final, grim chapters. Eliza, upon learning of her daughter's death and Annie's arrest, knew Wyndham had won the immediate battle, but she was determined to win the war. She went into deep hiding, a ghost haunting the edges of her own life, but she never ceased her search for Emily. And she found her. The photograph in the safe was the proof. A girl, living in that very orphanage in Bombay, now a quiet young woman of 16, her features a heartbreaking echo of her mother's. The invoice found in Wyndham's effects after his death, for a shipment to Annie at the Clerkenwell Apothecary, signed by E. Harrow, this was not a clerical error. It was a deliberate message, a shot across the bow. It was Eliza telling Wyndham, from the shadows, "I am still here. I have found what you tried to destroy, and I am in contact with your prisoner." It was her way of tormenting him, of letting him know that his victory was incomplete, that the past was not buried. This, perhaps, is what finally broke him. The knowledge that his secret was still alive, breathing across an ocean. That the woman he had condemned was still a thread connecting him to the crime he tried to erase. His suicide in the Thames takes on a new, complex light. Was it guilt? Or was it the final, logical step of a man who had run out of moves, cornered by the relentless ghost of a grandmother's love? And Annie, in her cold, damp prison cell, wasting away from consumption, she had one last card to play. She had the key and the address. She wrote them down, sealed them away, and waited. She knew that one day, someone with a mind for patterns, someone like Arthur Pimm, would come looking. She could not clear her name in life, but she could ensure that the truth would not die with her. This was her final act of loyalty, not to the Wyndhams, but to the truth. So, who was ultimately responsible? The Old Bailey jury said Annie Fraser. The circumstantial evidence pointed overwhelmingly to Captain Wyndham. But the true poison in that parlor was not in a blue glass bottle or a china cup. It was the toxic, corrosive combination of pride, power, and patriarchal control. Wyndham's obsession with his reputation, his honor, led him to destroy a child's life, which in turn broke his wife's spirit, which transformed his mother-in-law into a relentless avenger, which ultimately led him to commit murder to cover his own original sin. He was the architect, the prime mover, the one who set every tragic domino in motion. But justice, in any conventional sense, was never served. Wyndham escaped the noose, choosing his own end. Annie died a convict, her true role misunderstood. Clara and Eliza were lost to violence and grief. There were no winners in the house on Belgrave Square, only varying shades of loss, a spectrum of pain that touched every single life connected to that address. There is a postscript to this story, one that Arthur Pimm could never officially confirm, but which he believed in his heart to be true. A ship's manifest from the port of Bombay, dated 1911, lists a passenger named Emily Harris, age 16, occupation, domestic servant. She was met at the Tilbury docks by an elderly woman whose name is not recorded in any ledger. A woman who, according to a garrulous shipping clerk Pimm managed to track down, held the girl for a very long time on the crowded quay and did not let go. The poison of the past did not fade. Its bitter taste lingered on for decades, in archives and in memories. But sometimes, from the most toxic and blighted soil, a single, fragile flower can fight its way toward the light. The story of Clara, Eliza, Annie, and Emily is not just a story about a murder. It is a story about the ferocious, unyielding lengths a mother will go for her child. It is a story about the resilience of love in the face of absolute darkness. And it is a stark, enduring warning that the most dangerous poisons are not those that kill the body, but those that corrupt the soul, leaving a legacy of pain that can echo through generations, waiting for a key, an address, and a curious man to finally bring it into the light. This was Trace Crime Files. Subscribe for more stories where truth is stranger than fiction, and justice is never as simple as it seems.